It's a privilege to be here to talk with you guys about just kind of like an overview of the state of the longevity biotech industry as I see it. Maybe I can just get some audience interaction here. You can just look at my bio. Stephanie already, introduced myself and, the organizations I'm working with. But who here is completely new to longevity? Because that could sort of inform my talk. Okay, yeah. So a lot of newcomers here. How many people here are coming from like an entrepreneurial background? You're an entrepreneur? Yeah. How about scientists? How many scientists in the room? Okay, cool, awesome. And who's coming from like completely outside of biology? Or maybe you're like in tech or AI, software. Yeah, okay. We got a mixed crowd here. Excellent. Okay, so there's going to be something here for everyone. I've thought of everything for a broad audience here. But just very quickly, agenda. I'm just going to talk about the problem of aging because. Even though some of you might already, be working on this and know all the arguments, it's good to just outline like the moral foundation of why we should be doing this at all, and maybe you can use those arguments when you talk to other people. And then I'll give just like a brief history of the longevity biotech industry, and then state of the longevity biotech industry today, and just a few words about the future. So, problem of aging. So, as you know, if you say you're working on cancer, nobody bats an eye. But you say you're working on aging, suddenly you get all sorts of questions, all sorts of burning questions. And so I'm just going to outline some of these, some moral foundations to why we should be working on this, and maybe you can use these arguments when you talk to other people about it. But just quick show of hands here, people in the audience. Who here believes that involuntary death is a good thing? Just raise your hand if you think involuntary death is a good thing. Oh, okay, great, fantastic. Okay, so for all the people who didn't raise your hands, congratulations, you're not a sociopath. So great, excellent. So basically, when you think about moral values, right? And why do we do anything at all? What problems should we work on? How do we do good? And so forth in the world. There's kind of like a rational framework for trying to address this, and that's called effective altruism. Which may have sort of a tarnished reputation as of late. But the general principle is sound. Like, how do you crunch the numbers to figure out what are the most important problems to work on that would do the most good? And usually in the effective altruism framework, they'll say, we should just work on the things that derive the most benefit for humanity. And often that means saving the most lives, right? And that's really a metric that we can measure quite easily, right? Opposed to other things like reduction of suffering or deriving of benefit, which is a little bit harder. So if you want to do the most good by saving the most lives, you could ask yourself, what are the things that kill the most people, right? That would be like a rational thing to ask. So just shout it out, people in the audience. What are the top causes of death in the United States? Does anybody know? Yeah? Cardiovascular, yeah? Anything else? Cancer, yeah? What else? Yeah, go ahead, sorry. Diarrhea. Yes, maybe not in the top 10, okay. Anything else? COVID recently. Yeah, COVID, yeah, of course. Okay, so if you look at the latest numbers from at least 2020, if you look at the top 10 causes of death, like heart disease is at the top, cancer, COVID, obviously in 2020, and you have things like Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, and so forth. But one of the things that's really notable here is that of these top 10 causes of death, most of them have a very strong age-related component to them. And what's more interesting is as you look underneath the hood, right? You look at all these diseases of aging, let's say, cancer, cardiovascular disease, Alzheimer's disease or dementias. They all have this exponential increase of risk as you get older. And even though these diseases, manifest in different ways and, symptomatically look very different, there's something common or fundamental in terms of like a root cause to all these diseases. There's something that's happening to your tissues, your cells, and to your body as you get older that makes you susceptible to these diseases. And actually, in fact, a lot of these diseases, you can probably more think of them as late-stage manifestations of the aging process itself, okay? So that's a problem. Maybe we should do something about it. Instead of just targeting diseases individually, there might be some sort of way we can target fundamental causes of these diseases of aging, which is the aging process. And, aside from the fact that doing something about aging would save a lot of lives, which is a good thing, if you're not interested in doing good and you only care about money because you're a soulless capitalist, well, guess what? Longevity is for you too, because aging is very costly, okay? So just looking at one age-related disease, like Alzheimer's disease, for instance, it's projected to cost, the United States in Medicare and Medicaid costs about $1 trillion by the year 2050, which is not that far away. And actually, if you, a couple of economists were able to crunch the numbers and estimate that the total economic value of extending healthy lifespan in the world by just 1 year is worth like $38 trillion. So obviously, there's an economic reason to work on aging, and of course, the moral reasons to be working on aging. And now there's a new crop of, biotech startups basically trying to do this. They're trying to address aging at its root causes, at the cellular, molecular levels, and other ways, to potentially treat multiple age-related diseases of aging, and by doing that, extend lifespan, healthy lifespan. And so this is sort of like a sort of rough definition of this sort of field and the startups trying to accomplish this mission and extend healthy lifespan. Now, and they're doing this by targeting, and I put in quotes, cellular or molecular mechanisms of aging. It's still not 100% clear what those are. We have certain targets. There's been a lot of study in the sort of like 3 decades of molecular genetics of aging and so forth. But we'll get into that in a second. So if you want to target aging and you're a longevity biotech startup, there's a couple of different frameworks that are being used currently by the crops of the sort of 100 or so longevity biotech startups. And some of them are looking at different targets in sort of like a framework of, let's say, the hallmarks of aging, which is a famous paper in 2013, which is now being expanded to about like 14 or 13 hallmarks of aging. Basically there are different targets in the cell or processes that are correlated to aging in some sort of way by looking at studies in short-lived organisms, model organisms. And some of these include like cellular senescence or shortening of telomeres and so forth. So that's one way, and you could develop like a small molecule drug or some other, maybe like a gene therapy or antibody to target these processes, right? These hallmarks of aging. Now, there's another framework, the SENS framework, which is more looking at damage repair. There's some commonalities between this and the SENS categories and the 9 hallmarks of aging and so forth. You can look into that more. That was by Aubrey de Grey and popularized in his Ending Aging book. And then there's other ways you could just like replace old tissue, right? Old damaged tissue with young tissue through regenerative medicine techniques. And there's different ways you could do that with like stem cells, induced pluripotent stem cells, or maybe even small molecule drugs that stimulate regeneration in situ. And of course, there's maybe more hypothesis-free ways of finding targets. You could just do like high throughput experiments, or you could leverage large data sets with machine learning data science processes to find potential new targets that are correlated to aging or have could be potential causes or targets. And then in terms of like the playbook, how do you actually commercialize these drugs that are targeting aging or interventions, therapies, medicines? So longevity startups right now are mostly using this number one playbook here that I've outlined. And basically, they're trying to do label expansion. So none of the longevity companies, or almost none of the longevity biotech companies today are going after longevity or life extension on like the label, let's say, as the indication. None of them are doing that. So what they're doing is they're going after some sort of stepping stone indication. So they'll choose some sort of specific disease. It could be like a rare disease, or it could also be like an age-related disease of some sort. And they'll go after that first. And then once they get prove safety and efficacy in that indication, then they can do something called label expansion, where they go after other indications. And then if you expand to other diseases, which could also include multiple age-related diseases, maybe you can demonstrate that this has some sort of anti-aging effect. Your therapy has an anti-aging effect. Okay, so that's mostly the playbook that's going on right now. And then step two could be something like a TAME-like trial. So who here is familiar with the TAME trial? Yeah, okay. So basically, a TAME trial is trying to look at a geroprotective effect. So can you delay the onset, prevent essentially, or delay multiple age-related diseases at the same time. So if you can demonstrate that in a clinical trial, then you could also say that your therapy has an anti-aging effect of some sort. And then there's other ways you could leverage aging biomarkers. Maybe that you could develop sort of a surrogate endpoint, just as we do have like cholesterol standing in for a surrogate endpoint for cardiovascular disease. You could maybe develop the same thing for aging as a disease if you developed the appropriate biomarker. But that's a huge question, open question right now. And I think there's other talks and panels on that later. And then the last step, which is an interesting way to commercialize these longevity therapies, is actually to try in pets, right? So a lot of people think of pets as family members, and because some breeds of pets, like large breed dogs, actually have fairly short lifespans, you can actually test life extension in a dog within a reasonable amount of time. Whereas trying to do the same thing in humans would take many decades and would be very expensive. Not impossible, I might note, but just very difficult. Okay, so that's basically the playbook, and this is the motivation for doing targeting aging and how companies are trying to do that. But let's just step back and get a little bit of context of what have people tried already in the development of the field in tandem with the science of studying aging. So one thing to really note about the history of longevity and aging biology and so forth is that it's really new, right? So we've only really been studying the molecular genetics of aging since maybe the 1980s-ish, mid-1980s, with certain discoveries of single mutations in C. elegans, so nematode worms that could extend their lifespan. So a lot of work done by Tom Johnson and Cynthia Kenyon in like 1980s and 1990s. And then the first crop of longevity startups actually got off the ground in like the 2000s. There's three major companies, Geron, Elixir, and Certris, which were basically leveraging some of the insights and targeting some of these like early longevity genes that were discovered in the early days of molecular genetics of aging. And then those companies mostly, unfortunately, died down or were pivoted away from aging, or were eventually just shuttered. Certris was acquired by GSK, but then controversially was shut down. But then that was not the end of the Longevity Biotech's startup. The first wave was over, but then there was this like another inflection point around 2013 when Calico got into the game. So Calico is this company started by Google Alphabet, I guess, and they were able to recruit Art Levinson to be the CEO of this company, who is an ex-CEO of Genentech, one of the biggest pharma companies in the world, and also Craig Venter from the Human Longevity, from his fame from the Human Longevity project, also started a company called Human Longevity Inc. So well-known people in biotech getting involved in longevity kind of made it more legitimate, and they were able to sort of make really established credibility in the field. And then in 2016, a lot of different, like around 2016, a lot of different approaches in new targets, new techniques to modulate aging started to crop up, including, senolytics, partial reprogramming, and so forth. And also aging clocks became sort of popular and commercialized around that time as well. And then bringing us to today in 2023, if I could encapsulate, what's going on in the space with a few words, I would say it's just like lots of hype, a lot of big funding and big headlines, but we're still, really only at the beginning. Where in terms of like the size and scope of this field, it's still really small compared to where we need to be if we want to actually solve the problem of aging completely, which I think is a moral thing to do. Okay, so let's talk about state of longevity biotech right now. In 2023, this is the most important number probably. There are 0 drugs approved for aging or longevity. That's just a fact, right? But that's not like a bad thing. There's obviously been a lot of work and progress in science and in building the field in the 3 decades of the study of, let's say, aging biology from a molecular basis. And so I said this before. You only take away 2 things about the state of the industry today, there's been an explosion of interest. There's a lot of big funders, and there's been a lot of big headlines that probably you are all familiar with. But to truly make a dent on this problem within our lifetimes, I think we need many orders of magnitude more funding. And I think we could be on the way, but you don't want to leave this to chance. So this is an open call to anybody in this audience to get involved in this field. Okay, so let's talk about some of these big headlines. So who here has heard of Altos Labs? Yeah, okay, almost everyone. Yeah, so this was announced last year, basically the largest seed financing in history of any startup ever, not just biotech, $3 billion, allegedly backed by Jeff Bezos and Yuri Milner, essentially poached a lot of the top talent in aging biology to leave academia to start this company called Altos Labs. And they're going after mostly this technique called partial reprogramming. But it's not just them. Sam Altman from OpenAI, Y Combinator, put $180 million into a company called Retro Biosciences, also going after partial reprogramming and a couple other techniques. And then also Brian Armstrong, Coinbase CEO and founder, put $105 million into a company called New Limit, also going after partial reprogramming. And so other big funders are getting into the space, not just like billionaires, it's also sovereigns. So Saudi Arabia announced last year the creation of this Healthspan Foundation. It's an organization that will allocate $1 billion per year into aging research and companies, about 2/3 into research, basic research in aging biology, but then 1/3 of it into private startups. So that's incredible news. But just a couple numbers to give you a sense of the scope and size of the longevity biotech industry. About 170 companies, and across those 170 companies, it's about $13 billion in funding, private funding. Valuation's probably less than 50 billion, let's say. And then in terms of clinical trials, about 40. And then 20 or so longevity-focused, specifically longevity-focused venture capital firms. And last year there was about more than $3.5 billion in private funding. But just to give you a sense of how small longevity is relative to, let's just say, all of pharma biotech, if we took just all of the private and public longevity biotech companies in terms of valuation compared to the total valuation of all of pharma biotech, just the public companies, you can see there's roughly 100x difference here, okay? Pharma biotech is $5 trillion total market valuation. And in terms of funding, it's also a very similar situation where biotech startup funding in the years 2017 to 2021, longevity, depending on how you categorize it, if you only took maybe about 3% of that funding. but things are growing, so there's still some hope, let's say. So in the past 7 years, there's definitely been an uptick in the amount of private funding going to longevity biotech. A lot of this is dominated by the mega startups like Altos Labs with their $3 billion. Calico was also several $billion. But one thing I do want to note is that the sort of current macroeconomic conditions are kind of unfortunate. So in terms of funding this year, funding has gone down dramatically for longevity biotech, but it's not just longevity that's suffering, it's just biotech in general, and not just biotech in general, it's startups in general, unless you're like some sort of generative AI company, I would say. And this is obviously due to the Fed hiking interest rates and so forth. So there's something going on there. I guess the takeaway is if you're an investor who's mission-driven with dry powder, then you're in an advantage here because valuations has come down and capital is more expensive, it's more scarce. Okay. So I just want to outline some longevity subsectors. So this is just a rough way of putting different companies into different buckets. Some of it's by by technique, let's say like using a lot of AI machine learning, or by targets, right? Like going after mitochondria and trying to fix mitochondrial dysfunction, let's say. There's also business case like pet longevity, let's say. So there's a lot of different companies. Not all of the categories are represented here, but it's just a tasting of what's in the longevity industry. But then in terms of startup categories, subsector categories by funding size, obviously, here on the left, partial reprogramming has taken the lion's share with all these mega companies like Altos Labs and so forth. But what's more interesting is maybe the companies on the right side of this graph that are receiving the least amount of funding. So maybe there's more opportunity there because they're so underfunded relative to the other subsectors. So companies going after extracellular matrix, that's extremely underfunded. DNA repair as well is another category that doesn't seem to attract as much funding. So I'll just quickly go through some of these because I know we're running over the schedule right now. And so I just want to touch briefly on the partial reprogramming because it does attract so much funding, and because last year with Altos Labs, it's definitely the subsector with the most hype. And basically, it comes down to this idea of trying to reset the epigenetic state of a cell to make it younger, but not all the way to the point where it becomes like a stem cell and loses its cell identity, right? So different cells, like a heart cell versus a skin cell, they have the same DNA, right? But it's the way that their genes are expressed which differentiates them as different cells. And scientists believe that there's a way to disentangle genes that could make a cell younger at the epigenetic level versus the genes that change the state of the cell, the differentiation of the cell. So a lot of companies are basically trying to reprogram cells and do this partial reprogramming technique that was pioneered by Alejandro Ocampo and Juan Carlos at Belmonte at the Salk Institute in 2016. And so a bunch of new companies were created in the intervening years. And basically, there's this kind of like space race for rejuvenation. Some companies are going after the traditional Yamanaka factors, let's say, to do reprogramming. But then others are trying to find novel genes to reprogram cells to make them younger and potentially increase healthy lifespan. So there's of course other subsectors. There's a whole bunch of companies going after senescent cells. These are cells that accumulate with age, that lose the ability to divide, and they're implicated in sort of a variety of age-related diseases and inflammation and so forth. There's mitochondria companies. I'm just going to flip through these really quickly. You can find these slides later. I just wanted to get you a taste that these companies exist and which ones are in the space. Obviously, AI machine learning, there's different ways you could leverage those tools to find targets and drugs and different interventions. There's a whole category of regenerative medicine. Pet longevity is very interesting. I think one of the companies leading the way there is Loyal, and I think they have some early clinical data that is really cool. Reproductive aging. Laura Minkini at ThenaDAO was speaking earlier today, so that's another interesting way, a stepping stone indication maybe for extending lifespan by demonstrating that you can extend reproductive health span. There's different aggregates that accumulate with age inside the cell, outside the cell, and there's different ways you can modulate aging through reducing DNA mutations or rejuvenation of the immune system, and so forth and so forth. You can go into these details later. But okay. Two things I wanted to say before we wrap up here. So there was two categories that I didn't really add to the subsector slide, and basically these are interesting, more radical technologies, maybe that I call hardcore longevity. Quote. So replacement as like a broad category thesis. Jean Hebert, professor of genetics at Einstein College of Medicine, wrote a really great book, which I highly recommend. It's called Replacing Aging. And his core hypothesis is that maybe if you want to solve aging completely, that you might not be able to really intervene in all the complex metabolism and molecular changes that happen with aging in the cell. And actually, maybe an easier way of addressing those changes is to just replace everything, and including the brain. So he has an interesting take on how you could do that in a progressive manner. There's other people who are working on, let's say, whole body replacement through other techniques as well, which could include synthetic embryos or therapeutic cloning, as some people will call it. And then there's different ways you could do organ replacement at whole systems of organs. Maybe that's with 3D bioprinting, but it could also be through xenotransplantation. So there's a George Church company called eGenesis, which is quite mature, like a Series C company. Trying to do genetically modified pigs as a way to source organs, right? And then there's also cryopreservation, which is kind of not really the same as longevity, but it's longevity adjacent. And basically the idea there is if you can take a body that is someone who is medically pronounced dead, most of the information could maybe be preserved if you bring it down to, let's say, cryogenic temperatures, like liquid nitrogen temperatures. And then in the hopes in the future, there will be some technology to be able to revive or repair the damage from the freezing and rewarming process. And there was a interesting science paper just like a couple of weeks back where they were able to freeze a rat kidney and then bring it back to room temperature and transplant it and demonstrate that it was still working. So there are advances in the technology here. Okay. In terms of investors, just a slide of the overview of investors in the longevity space. Over here we have like longevity-focused VCs, where that's their main core thesis, and we have the Longevity Fund, which was the first longevity VC fund started by Laura Deming back in 2011. You have Apollo Health Ventures is probably the largest VC fund dedicated solely to aging, and a couple of others on that slide. You also have distributed companies. These are like holding companies that will basically incubate or hold large stakes in multiple longevity startup companies, like daughter companies. So like examples of which Cambrian, Biopharma, Life Biosciences, Juvenescence, and so forth. Of course, there's DAOs. We cannot forget to mention VitaDAO and AthenaDAO when we were talking about longevity and DeSci. So doing this in a collective manner, Web3, leveraging different technologies, Web3 technologies, which is a really interesting new way of funding companies and science in the space. And then, of course, there are some more traditional VC firms like tech investors who also dabble in longevity as well. I think Khosla Ventures is probably the one that has invested in the most longevity companies. Clinical trials, there's about 40 clinical trials across the 170 companies right now. And most are doing this like label expansion sort of startup playbook where they'll go after one indication and then try to expand it to other disease indications. And I said before, we're still waiting for that first approval. There's not even been a first approval in a drug developed in the context of aging for a single disease indication so far. So examples, but that doesn't mean that there hasn't been clinical success. So some really encouraging data out of BioAge, one of the bigger longevity biotech startups. They have a drug that they tested in clinic for muscle aging, which they were able to demonstrate some positive phase 1b data to slow muscle aging in bed-rested older adults. And then Unity Biotechnology developing senolytic drugs to essentially kill senescent cells in the eye. We're able to just demonstrate some positive phase 2 trial data for diabetic macular edema. So there's definitely been progress in that sense, and it's possible that we could see some sort of approval of the first like aging drug or drug developed in the context of aging, let's say, in the future, in the near future. Okay, so let's talk about the future. The future is what you make of it, really. Okay, so this space is so small right now. I mean, as I said before, only maybe like 170 companies. There's only like maybe single-digit thousands, definitely less than 10,000 people working in this space. So basically, what that means is any one person here, even in this room or listening online, could have an outsized impact on the space. Right? There's just so much open field. Basically, not much has been tested in humans to extend lifespan. And so any one person here could really change the trajectory of this space. So if you have an idea or you feel like you can make an impact, or maybe you feel you can't make an impact, I'm going to encourage you to try anyways, because this is the most important thing to be working on. So what else is worth doing in life than extending lifespan? I can't imagine. So, but that being said, I have my biases. So these are like wish lists, let's say. I'm not going to say these are like predictions of the futures, but this is what I think should be done. And you can also, think of your own wish lists and then just manifest them, right? So the way that I see it is we need to see more human data. A lot of the stuff that's been tested and a lot of the theories and frameworks are based solely on model organisms or mice, which could be very different from humans, right? So we need more data, and if you're thinking in the context of aging biomarkers, then of course we need more human data to validate that. And then I think gene delivery. So this is a problem that a lot of biotech startups are just like shopping out to other people or trying to outsource it, and they're just saying, oh, we're going to work on these rejuvenation genes, but in terms of like actually modulating them and delivering these genes, someone else will figure out the delivery problem. So so in terms of being able to modulate human biology in a significant high leverage way, if we can figure out gene delivery, then that could be an interesting way of targeting aging in the future. And then, of course, as I mentioned before, replacing aging is a really interesting paradigm to address aging without having to deal with all the complexities of metabolism. We could just replace old tissue with young, and we know how to create young tissue. And that's how nature has solved the aging problem, actually. And then longevity on the label through pets. I think this is really interesting because it could unlock a lot more interest and funding into the space, because you've actually made a demonstration that lifespan has been extended in let's say an organism that we care more about than mice, okay? And there's various companies working on that. But the problem with all these different like wish lists is they require a lot of money, it's extremely underfunded. So what we might want to think of is how do we solve all those problems with like a meta solution? And I think at the core, we just need more people and we need more money, right? And a comparable example is like the Apollo program. Right? The Apollo program, the U.S. in the 1960s believed that it was really important to fight communism and demonstrate, to defend freedom in that way by going to the moon, right? And that required 400,000 people. It was 2.5% of GDP, right, over 10 years, and $250 billion, right? So this is kind of like the scale, size, and scope of the scale of the problem that I think we need to allocate resources towards. And you guys can all be a part of this. So the field is still really small. So I would encourage you guys, if you're really interested in having a high impact on the problem of aging and working towards building a post-aging future, let's say, then maybe reach out to us at the Longevity Biotech Fellowship. We run a program to help people make career transitions to work on aging. It's not just for people who are scientists or aging biologists or whatever. We bring in people from AI, machine learning, serial entrepreneurs, media, communication, medicine, clinicians, everyone. So we just want to be able to get people to apply their diverse expertise and backgrounds to have an impact on this space. So you can check us out at longbiofellowship.org. And yeah, that's it. I think I'm done. We might have time for like 1 or 2 questions at most. Okay, thank you.